Hi, I'm Wayne Maglio, and I'd like to bring you back to this session of Today's Drummer. What we talked about in the last session was getting a drum set and getting it set up properly, and also a practice area so that you could do things to keep the drum set quiet so that you can practice at a reasonable volume level. With that, I'd like to close this and go on to the interview. Thank you very much. Well, for today's show, we'd like to welcome Mr. Duris Maxwell as our guest. I'd just like to say a few things about Duris. First of all, he's currently performing in town with a group called the R&B All-Stars. This group is playing A rooms and is a fairly large horn band. Duris has been known in town for playing rhythm and blues with various groups, including the Powder Blues Band. Today's interview will include topics about the real world of drumming and what it's like to actually get out there and play the road and play the job. First of all, I'd like to ask Duris if he can give us a bit of his background from the time he started playing and some of the various groups that he's been with.
Well, as bizarre as it might sound, I started playing when I was about 3 and a half. The neighborhood that I grew up in was in Vancouver on Dunbar Street, and there was still a lot of excitement about the conclusion of World War II. Yes, folks, I'm that old. There was a lot of parades and so forth, so I was really impressed with the marching drummers. And I had a gentleman friend across the street who took an interest in my music and so forth and would take me to Shriners band practices and so forth. So I came up with like a military background. That's why, and I still play traditional grip, only it's in reverse position to this day, as I guess as a result of the military background. I've played in a number of different groups. I'm not impressed with a lot of the name dropping that would go along with it. I suppose some of the would be Heart would be a group that some people would know about. But basically, I've just simply enjoyed the fact that I could play it all to whatever extent, and I've been blessed with the fact that I have the capacity to express some pretty intense feelings in a creative fashion.
Do you find that these feelings come out the same in all idioms of music? You've played jazz and rhythm and blues.
Well, there's different types of feelings that you can get across in different types of music, I expect. I just happen to have been enchanted with rhythm and blues from the time I was about, I guess, 13 or 14. I saw Tommy Chong and Wes Henderson and the guys that called themselves the Calgary Shades. And I was playing in a cowboy band at the time, if you can believe it, and also doing drum solos. And when I heard the kind of stuff that they were playing, which was derived from B.B. King and a number of other traditional blues artists, I was hooked completely at that point. And even though at that time in Vancouver it was in vogue to become a jazz drummer, and the big goal was to play in a 16-piece jazz band, to me it was a really clinical and I don't know, there was a lack of feeling to me. And I'm not saying that's how the music is, it's just my feeling about it. And since it was my musical life and my choice to, what to do with it, I just felt that it was really clinical music, and I didn't really see there was much spot in it for me. And especially, you know, like the high tempo, the real up tempo, screaming psychotic stuff. I personally to this day don't care if I ever hear again. But rhythm and blues, it was a really honest, primal sort of feeling, and it had shades of spiritual gospel music involved, and there was things that I could relate to, and I liked the tones of the instruments and the inversions and so forth, and just the feels of the stuff, and I still do. I'm still doing it now.
What role do you feel a drummer should play in today's rhythm and blues band?
Basically, if you can't make the thing feel like something, it has to feel tremendous. You have to have a capacity to have a repeatable action to the extent that you can lay down an absolutely mesmerizing feel. And the less you get in its way, in other words, the less crap you play on top of it and fills and so forth, the better usually. And knowing how to put the right touch at the right time is a higher art than being able to combine 100,000 notes over the course of an evening. And just being able to play really good time really well is something that is so difficult that I think a younger player usually can't even comprehend it. And older players are continually having to remind themselves that being able to play simply and with the right balance in between the bass drum, the snare drum, the hat, and all your cymbals and whatever, everything reading out to basically the same intensity, and to have the thing flowing, and to be it musical, and to know how to set verses and choruses up, and to really listen and not get preoccupied with your own trip, to relate to the other people musically. That's something that you'll perfect for the rest of your life.
I'd like to zoom in on the word, one of the words you've just used, the word intensity. Seeing you play is a very intense experience, especially from backstage. How can you suggest and recommend a drummer become completely controlled with his dynamic levels?
Well, for me it comes pretty easily because I tend to be a rather introspective, fairly serious type of person, which you know, that can create problems on the attitude side, or the practical application of what kind of fellow you are to be around. You know, I'm a little bit more of a handful for most people because I tend not to be, I don't try and do a lot of Steve Martin impressions and so forth like most people in studios tend to do. I take things a little bit more seriously. I think it's a serious world we're living in, and to be able to apply your responses to it in a musical fashion is really a blessing. I don't know what I really would have done with all the intensity that I possess if I hadn't the predisposition to work it out creatively. In other words, what I'm saying, folks, is I think I'd be in jail if it wasn't for music. Because as a youngster I was really hostile and really angry about a lot of the things that were happening to me, and I chose to just turn my back on most of it. I was at a school, for example, when I was 14. It's not something that I would recommend to any kids to jump up and run into the kitchen and say, "Mom, he was out of school when he was 14, can I quit?" Don't be a fool. One of us is enough, okay? It was just something that I couldn't function in. There was nothing there. I was in a really narrow right-wing high school that didn't want anything to do with creative artists and so forth. They didn't know what to do with them. They had no facilities, no money to speak of. I mean, you went for traditional professions or you left, so I left. I didn't have a choice. I wasn't fortunate enough to have had a father who was transferred to California or someplace that had a lot of economic support for various types of creative outlets. So if you decided to go into the arts or acting or whatever, you know, they had something for you. They had nothing for me musically. So I just went out on my own, unfortunately, because my family was musical and sensitive to my feelings and my desires, and were capable of comprehending my seriousness at that point about really going for music as a vocation. I was allowed to do it. But the intensity for me has been an automatic situation. And I've had students that I've taught that have picked up on that intensity also, and they've been wondering how that they can refine it in themselves. And basically, I've told all of them to go into some sort of a martial art program, and not to the extent where you have to start beating your hands up or whatever. I'm talking about the pure principle of being able to discipline your mind and to really come to terms with your own concentration.
I'd like to thank Duris very much for coming out. I hope his words will be absorbed by a lot of people in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland. Thank you very much again, Duris.
Thank you.
And I wish you all the best success in the future. Now what I'd like you to do is, when they bring back the music in again, I'd like you to start on the snare drum, listen really carefully to the song, and so play quietly on the snare drum so that you don't drown it out. And then add whatever instrument it would be comfortable. Maybe the first thing to do would be to go to the hi-hat and keep the snare drum going. Then add the kick drum, if you can at this point. Okay, go ahead, Andrew.